Hello, everyone. I think just about everyone's across the line here, out of the waiting room into the fire. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to this 10th webinar, a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, and then Webinar Series in Progress, as shown here. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings webinars, the Secret Doctrine webinars, are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. Especially useful for, you can stop midway and read some of these excerpts with more detail if you're interested, particularly interested. This webinar series is also, you can register, that is, for any of these webinars on the home page of moriafederation.com. And then you'll see them right up in the upper left-hand corner, along with a lot of other cool stuff on this website. Okay. During our last session, we continued our study of the transmitter of prana, this third of four subsections. Where we learned that except for the imperfections inherent in matter, the pranic system in and of itself would allow for existence of a, quote, almost endless duration. But because of the problems in matter itself, we have death and rebirth. We then learned that the goal for this greater cycle is, quote, the blending of the two fires of matter, latent and active, and their merging with the fires of mind and spirit. A theme which DK developed over the next few pages and will be continuing. This is like one of the root themes, the underlying themes of this whole section. And he also notes that it was the fusion of these two fires that was used to destroy Lemuria. So we ended our last session with this occult statement. These destructions by fire are part of the test by fire of an initiation of that one of the heavenly men whose karma is bound up with our earth. Kind of an extraordinary statement. And so I'd like to start by rereading these two paragraphs where this appears, and then we'll get into it, because we just stopped when we touched on this concept. So could we get a reader, please?
Yep. Yvonne, that's just piano.
Oh yeah, there's piano in the background. That's my partner playing for pleasure. So hopefully it's not too distracting.
Going down the list, and Heike.
We might here note a fact of interest, though a mystery insoluble as yet to most of us, and that is that these destructions by fire are part of the tests by fire of an initiation of that one of the heavenly man whose karma is bound up with our earth. Each destruction of a portion of the web results in a greater facility of exit, and is in reality, when seen from the higher planes, a step forward and expansion. A repetition of this takes place likewise in the system at the stated cycles.
Okay, this is really occult stuff. From the juxtaposition of these two short paragraphs, we might hypothesize that the fiery destruction of a root race is the destruction of a, quote, portion of the web, that they're one and the same, or one creates the other, possibly the destruction of the root race, then results in destruction of a part of the web. The fact that it is another heavenly man that is influenced by the destruction of one of Earth's root races suggests to me that it is part of the solar systemic etheric web, specifically matter of the second ether, that is being destroyed. Any thoughts or questions about this? Very provocative stuff. What would be the consequences and or opportunities provided by a conflagration of matter of the second ether of the systemic etheric web, which form the tests and trials preceding the initiation of another planetary logos? Possibly it would usher in an interim period between root races, maybe even the rising of a new continent to be populated by the following root race. For us, that would be the sixth root race. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please? And this is the final section of chapter 3, entitled 4 Disorders of the Etheric Body. Here we are. Can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, and Veronica.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Anne Veronica. Thank you.
Hello. 4. Disorders of the etheric body. We will now study the etheric body and its ills, and so its after-death condition, and also its after-death condition. This matter can be only briefly touched upon. All that may now be indicated is a general idea of the fundamental ailments to which the etheric may be subject, and the trend which applied medicine may later take when occult laws are better understood. One fact must here be brought out, a fact but little comprehended or even apprehended. This is the significant fact that the ills of the etheric vehicle in the case of the microcosm will be found likewise in the macrocosm. Herein lies the knowledge that oftentimes explains the apparent miseries of nature. Some of the great world evils have their source in etheric ills, extending to the idea of the etheric to the planetary conditions and even to solar.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. So
Thank you.
first, an introductory passage stating that only when occult laws are better understood will medicine be able to grapple with the disorders of the etheric body. MDR reminds us that, quote, Master DK is ever the healer, even in this presentation of his most cosmological work. You know, the second ray is one of the fortes of masters on the second ray is healing. Next, the ills of the etheric body in the case of the microcosm will be found likewise in the macrocosm. Herein lies the knowledge that oftentimes explains the apparent miseries of nature. To understand this, we need to go all the way back to the beginning of this section on prana, where we're told that we are physically vitalized by both solar and planetary prana. Now we learn that this prana is tainted by quote unquote etheric ills inherent in the macrocosm, our source of prana. The systemic etheric is part of the third aspect of divinity, the form aspect, right? Which was developed initially in the previous solar system and is thus prone to the imperfections of that system. We've, in a sense, inherited these ills, the disorders of the etheric body from that previous system. Next, some of the great world evils have their source in etheric ills, extending the idea of the etheric to planetary conditions and even to solar. So these etheric ills don't just impact our health aura, but are also responsible for, quote, great world evils. This is a reminder that human, planetary, and solar etheric is one unified system expressing itself on different levels on the cosmic, physical, etheric planes, but it's a unified system, and the energy is interconnected, and so are the ills of the etheric body interconnected. So originating at solar and working its way all the way down into the microcosmic system of the kingdoms of nature. And in relation to our planet, DK suggests these evils are the result, at least in part, of a taint in the Earth's planetary etheric body. MDR points out that this evil is part of what is called an esoteric healing, the ancient law of evil sharing. Can we get a reader for this quote from Esoteric Healing?
Yes. Joe.
Good morning.
Good morning, Joe.
Disease is the product of and subject to three influences. First, a man's past, wherein he pays the price of ancient error. Second, his inheritance, wherein he shares with all mankind those tainted streams of energy which are of group origin. Thirdly, he shares with all the natural forms that which the Lord of life imposes on his body. These three influences are called the ancient law of evil sharing. This must give place someday to that new law of ancient dominating good, which lies behind all that God made. This law must be brought into activity by the spiritual will of man.
Okay, so this third influence is especially relevant to our subject because he shares with all the natural forms that which the Lord of life imposes on his body or his material realm, right? Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, before Tia asks, is there a correlation with these ills and creative hierarchies?
Oh, of course. They Toys are us, right? The creative hierarchies makes up every aspect of the solar system from the top to the bottom. Now, those highest hierarchies that exist in cosmic astral substance are free of this taint because they're above the influence of even the cosmic etheric planes. But once you get into the manifested hierarchies, then they all share in this, some aspect of this taint, right? Especially the lower hierarchies, right? So, for instance, the seventh hierarchy, which is called the breadbasket of nourishment, from which all the little lives are drawn into the higher hierarchies, that they are all carry in their very substance the taint of the previous solar system that affects all materiality. And that just goes right up through all those hierarchies that have some connection with material form, right? So certainly all the hierarchies concerned with the constitution of a human being are affected to some extent, up through the mental sheath, you're going to be affected by the lower etheric, but once you get into a Buddhic envelope, then you're only affected by the cosmic etheric, quote unquote, ills, right, which are solar logoic. I think they're of a very different order. He doesn't get into that much here, but yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, Catherine Can we work with modifying tainted streams of energy from group origins?
Can we work from modified what? Say it again.
Can we work with modifying tainted streams of
Tainted.
energy from group origins?
From group origins. Well, first of all, you can all the work that you do on the spiritual path brings in a higher form of energy that helps to strengthen the etheric body. Because it's very specifically physical, right? So, and he tells us that right living habits, exposure to the sun, good food, meditation, and connection with the ego all strengthen the etheric. Eventually, this leads to allowing or creating a body that is strong enough to allow the Kundalini fire to rise up. If that were to happen prematurely, it will completely destroy the etheric system, because that Kundalini channel is all etheric. So it has to be strengthened over a period of, thousands of lifetimes. And that coincides, of course, with just walking the path. So the very fact of spiritual aspiration and discipleship builds a stronger etheric body. Nonetheless, in spite of that, all partakes to some extent in these problems that exist. This gets also into the this eventual fusion of latent and vibratory heat, the two aspects of matter, which is the goal of this cycle. We're just reading about that. And in that fusion of those two forms of fire, with the fire of mind, comes a level of transcendence out of this problem. But that's the goal of this entire world cycle. So it's not something immediately available to humanity as a whole, but each of us can strengthen our resistance to these problems just in our own discipleship work, really. Okay, anyone else?
Yvonne says TB, syphilis, and cancer are actually in the earth.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, esoteric healing, the whole book deals with these kinds of things, even, including pranic ills, though it has a broader scope than just the pranic ills, right? Right.
And then Miri asks, Eckhart Tolle says that once we heal our pain body, we help heal our family pain body, then our country pain body, and so forth. Would that apply here?
Yeah, of course, but what is meant by healing? Healing is done through identification and love, right? And having a strict, meaning having a physical, having an orientation towards your physical body, that it is a vehicle of light, right? Because it is. And the more that light of the soul, is able to play through that, then the more immune it becomes, right? So that is the path that you just described, moving up through higher and higher identifications, through identification with that light. They're connected, but they're not the same. That is to say, the pranic ills are a purely third principle aspect. It's a form aspect problem, right? But they can be influenced and healed by connecting to the second principle, the soul aspect, and through just exposure to sunshine, and all the sane ways of treating your physical vehicle, good diet, etc. Anyone else?
That's all.
Okay. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes. Kira.
As we touch upon the causes of etheric distress in man, their planetary and solar correspondences and reactions may perhaps be realized. We will need to bear carefully in mind when studying this matter that all the diseases of the etheric body will appertain to its threefold purpose and be either A, functional, and thereby affecting its apprehension of prana, B, organic, and thereby affecting its distribution of prana, C, static, and thereby affecting the web when viewed solely from the angle of providing a physical ring pass knot and acting as a separator between the physical and the astral. These three different groups of functions or purposes are each of paramount interest, lead to totally different results, and react in different manner both outwardly and inwardly.
Thank you. So first up, as we touch upon the causes of etheric distress in man, their planetary and solar correspondences and reactions may perhaps be realized. This is an inductive approach, i.e., determine the higher correspondences through an analysis of the lesser and more familiar. Next, we will need to bear carefully in mind when studying this matter that all the diseases of the etheric body will appertain to its threefold purpose and be either, and then the first one, functional and thereby affecting its apprehension of prana. So it took me a while to get used to these terms, functional, organic, and static, but after a bit you can form a connection between the title, functional, organic, static, and the condition. They're a little odd to me, but anyway, that's just my opinion. So this first one, functional and thereby affecting its apprehension of prana. Apprehension comes via the pranic triangle, whose function is susceptible to compromise by the ill health or stunted growth of its three centers, right? We've talked about that, how in modern society, none of the centers work perfectly, even though he says the one between the shoulder blades works better than the others. And so that disables in part its functionality, right? It lessens its ability to function correctly. Next, B, organic, and thereby affecting its distribution of prana. Organic suggests physicality. So distribution is carried out by means of the physical spleen and the ability to receive prana, which depends on the general health of both the spleen and the body. And finally, static, quote, and thereby affecting the web when viewed solely from the angle of providing a physical ring pass knot and acting as a separator between the physical and astral. This is about the health of the etheric body acting in the capacity of a protective web, right? The word static, as here used, probably means the ability to act as a barrier. Finally, these three different groups of functions or purposes are each of paramount interest. Everybody paramountly interested? And they lead to totally different results and react in a different manner, both outwardly and inwardly. And we'll be getting into that. let's continue. Can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, just before that, let me read something Tia wrote.
Uh-huh.
She says the 5 liberated hierarchies are in their totality the sum total of manas. It is the hierarchy which is the 5th in order and which we are told is in process of achieving final liberation or taking its 4th initiation, which is the cause of certain phenomena upon our planet, which has merited our planet being called the star of suffering. There is a karmic link between the animal kingdom and the 5th creative hierarchy of the earlier system, which makes itself felt in the man in the necessary crucifixion of the animal physical nature, particularly along sex lines. We must remember that the hierarchies work under the law of attraction. It is the law of the builders.
Yeah. Yeah, so that 5th hierarchy, counting from above down, the 8th counting up, is the first from above down that is still manifesting on the cosmic physical plane. It's not yet, it's on the verge of liberation, and liberation in this case means liberating into the cosmic astral plane. And therefore it's very strongly a conditioning hierarchy for all those beneath it, right? And hence, it is a source of this suffering. He doesn't specifically in that quote mention the pranic aspect, but since it is part of the cosmic physical plane, in the highest, it would probably be in the 2nd, I would guess, because it's in this solar system, manifestation starts at the 2nd etheric. It's probably in that. I don't think he actually says just which subplane it's in, but that'd be my guess. And so it would be participating in these highest solar cosmic etheric ills that were inherited from the previous solar system. Thanks for that quote. I think it's helpful in this case. Though, there are many more ills, diseases, etc., that occur that are not part of this particular chronic taint. Okay, could we get
Well, Tia has her hand up. She has something else.
Go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also it's the mediating factor, that it's passing through this and affecting our very nature, our physicality, that of these hierarchies. That is just so profound. I mean, affecting us on so many levels and causing suffering on so many levels that to me is just, when you think about it, it's really how these energies pass through our systems and the nature of the vehicle not being refined and how it has these sort of arbitrary impacts until we get to a point, till they're liberated, of course, and until we get to a point where, we're no longer conditioned by them to the degree that we are now.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There is a you could say a cosmic influence that comes just by being at this stage in the 2nd manifestation of the solar system that carries with it this physical taint, right? But as individuals, groups, even sacred planets, at every level, your identification with the higher allows a distancing of that taint, because you aren't identified with the form aspect. Because, he doesn't talk about this, but my guess is that this isn't confined to just the physical systemic etheric, that because you have astral etheric and especially the astral etheric, you would think would also be in some way influenced by this, even though, everything he said so far is just dealt with the physical etheric. But since this taint affects all etheric, if it affects the 4 highest cosmic etheric planes, it's also affecting the highest 4 subplanes of every plane, right? At some level, including the mental plane. But this speculation, at this point, is just supposition based on what he's told us. Anyone else? Thanks, Tia. Okay, can we get a reader, please?
Yes. Kristen.
Viewed from the planetary standpoint, the same conditions will be perceived in the etheric planetary body, which is fundamentally the body in the case of the sacred planets, of which the Earth is not one, will have its functional disorders, which will affect its reception of prana, will suffer its organic troubles, which may affect its distribution. And those disorders which permit of trouble in the etheric web, which forms the ring pass not for the involved planetary spirit. Here I would point out that in the case of the planetary spirits who are on the divine evolutionary arc, the heavenly men whose bodies are planets, the etheric web does not form a barrier, but like the karmic lords on a higher plane, they have freedom of movement outside the bounds of the planetary web within the circumference of the solar ring pass not.
Thanks, Kirsten. First, viewed from the planetary standpoint, the same conditions will be perceived, and the etheric planetary body, which is fundamentally the body in the case of the sacred planets, of which the Earth is not one, will have its functional disorders. So, the same conditions will be perceived suggests that problems with the reception and distribution of prana are found at planetary levels. Also, apparently, etheric ills are not just found in the non-sacred planets, suggesting that becoming sacred does not cure these ills. Finally, we have a curious italic on the word "the," which suggests an important distinction between the sacred and non-sacred planets. Quote, the etheric planetary body is fundamentally the body in the case of the sacred planets. Anything that has a physical form is going to be subjected to these. The way beyond this influence is identification with that which is beyond the form aspect, right? Let's take a look at MDR's thoughts on this last sentence, which is, Can we get a reader, please?
Maria.
Yes. Another important hint is given for the sacred planets. The etheric body is fundamentally the body. A sacred planet is one in which the informing intelligence has taken the planetary fifth initiation. Such loci have overcome the magnetic influence of the dense physical vehicle, which the logos of Earth has not. For the lotus of Earth, the dense physical vehicle is still fundamentally the body.
So he's pointing out here that sacred planets are identified. Their physicality is identified with the etheric. For non-sacred planets, it's still identified with the dense physical. Okay, that's his point. Okay. Next up, a sacred planet will have its functional disorders, which will affect its reception of prana, will suffer its organic troubles, which may affect its distribution, and those disorders which permit of trouble in the etheric web, which forms the ring pass knot for the involved planetary spirit. So, says at least on Earth, pranic assimilation and distribution is carried out by a hierarchy of devas. We have to wonder if at least part of the problem is some imperfection either in the deva kingdom itself or in their method of pranic irradiation. The fact that their work is to build and maintain the form aspect strengthens this possibility. Or it could be that the devas are neutral agents and the fault lies in the energy that they're distributing and radiating in the prana itself, right? He doesn't address this question, but it's a thought. Next, here I would point out that in the case of the planetary spirits who are on the divine evolutionary arc, the heavenly men whose bodies are planets, the etheric web does not form a barrier. But like the karmic lords on a higher plane, they have freedom of movement outside the bounds of the planetary web within the circumference of the solar ring pass knot. So here DK makes a distinction between the, quote, planetary entities who are affected by disorders of the etheric web and the heavenly men who are not in any way restricted by the planetary etheric web, since their consciousness lies beyond the cosmic physical plane. And that's the key to escaping this taint or influence. Nonetheless, there's almost like a crucifixion involved because they've agreed to inhabit in soul, enliven this outer physical vehicle, right? So even though they, on their own level, are unaffected, the vehicle in which they dwell is. We learn more from in the footnote. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Yeah, before that, I think Tia had a question.
Yeah.
This quote actually speaks to what my comment was going to be, that the planet itself is a living entity. And so when we think about even our own physical body, as I guess as a microcosmic example, the inflow of all of these different energies causes cleavages, right, that need to be healed. And then the planet also is receiving cosmic energies of a purificatory nature. So all of that is tampering with or would affect the etheric web. And I would suspect the devas would be trying to offset all of that sort of cataclysmic, it's hard to think of, but the stimulation that's happening into this etheric web with all of these things that are going on as well, as the planet is moving on in its own evolutionary path.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, that the cleavages are, I wouldn't say formed, but are in part accentuated by this taint, making it more difficult to achieve union, especially between the etheric and the physical, which is the Lemurian phase, right? And the Lemurian race was actually destroyed by this combination of radiatory and latent fire. So that may have been necessary somehow in connection with this healing of this cleavage that was the main purpose of the Lemurian, at least the physical part of the Lemurian race, was to combine the physical and etheric. and make them one functioning unit. It's, yeah, you bring up some interesting points there, Tia. And as to the Deva kingdom, working to heal, it's that's the way we think of them, isn't it? Is healing devas. So it's interesting to think that the devas that distribute pranic energy are essentially working with a tainted substance. And how do you reconcile that? Well, prana is, and at least in terms of life and form, it's vitality itself. It's essential, so you can't withhold prana because it's tainted. It's just, we're all in this. I'm thinking of fish in a sea that's polluted. We're all in this together, and you still have to have the nutrients of the sea that you're swimming in, and the process of healing will take, because it comes from a previous system, will take the whole length of this system to overcome. Good thoughts. Thank you. Okay, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that's a really great way to look at a higher way to look at the environmental crisis that doesn't apply any pressure on anybody to make them feel bad, but explains, that as we lose the David kingdom that are kind of like a filter or like a sheath in a way, we're actually taking on more of the toxicity, which is quite clear that it's happening.
Yeah.
We don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it, it suggests the end of a cycle. That toxicity suggests that, because it's death-like, and death ends cycles, right? The problem of the normal human perspective or perspective of civilization is that it's a final end, but it's not. It's just the end of this particular cycle, and that's one way that it's being brought on. Okay, anyone else? Can we get a reader, please, for this footnote?
Yeah, Miri.
The planetary spirit is another term for the logos of our planet, one of the 7 spirits before the throne, and therefore one of the 7 heavenly men. He is on the evolutionary arc of the universe and has passed many stages beyond the human. The planetary entity is on the involutionary arc and is on a very low-grade entity. He is the sum total of all the elemental lives of the planet.
Thank you. So let's take a closer look at this concept of a planetary entity. Could we, a little bit later in TCF, could we get a reader, please?
Lisa.
The involutionary lives, as earlier pointed out, form the vehicles for the spirit of the planet or the planetary entity, who is the sum total of the elemental essences in process of involution. He holds a position in relation to a heavenly man analogous to that held by the different elementals that go to the makeup of man's 3 bodies, physical, astral, and mental. And he is, like all manifesting beings, threefold in his nature, but involutionary.
Okay, any thoughts about this? Questions? All right, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yep. Robert. I wonder if he's there. It's been
Robert,
quiet.
are you there?
All right.
And then characteristically quiet moment from Robert.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So, Tia.
Robert. Okay. Tia, great.
Again, from the systemic standpoint, these same effects may be observed functionally, this time in connection with the cosmic center, organically in connection with the sum total of the planetary systems, and statically in connection with the solar or logoic ring path 9. We might now, for purposes of clarity, take up these three groups separately and briefly touch upon them and hint, for more will not be possible, at methods of cure and of adjustment.
Okay, so this first short passage cites the same three divisions, but now applies them to a systemic rather than a planetary perspective. Its functional problems, which have to do with reception, have to do with the cosmic center, because that center is its source of prana. Let's read MDR's thoughts on the subject. Reader, please.
Okay. And Veronica. Oh, Robert. You there?
Excuse me, I have to step away from a. Am I to read the what is the cosmic center?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What is the cosmic center from which our solar system receives the prana, which it will then qualify? If analogy holds good, it will be from an entity in which our solar system acts as a chakra, and therefore from the cosmic entity which expresses through 7 sacred suns, i.e., which expresses through 7 solar systems, of which ours is one.
So this is, one good hypothesis from, of what that cosmic center might be, that the sun receives its prana, right? In the same sense that the 7 sacred planets are the form the chakras within the solar logos, then that and they are nourished by the solar prana. Well, the same. To extend that analogy outward, you would have these 7 solar systems being the source of prana for our solar system. Any thoughts about this? There's some alternate theories, like at one point he talks about the Milky Way as being the source of prana. And you might remember that. He discussed that. And that it just is sort of like this great pranic field. But it seems to me, I agree with Michael, that there's going to be a more specific focalizing of this pranic field into our solar system. Okay, next, its organic problems demonstrate through the sum total of planetary schemes, because both the etheric and physical bodies of the planets are affected by problems of distribution. This suggests that there is a problem with the systemic pranic triangle, whose individual centers are not given, but because we're talking about the system here, not the sun. So they may be 3 unnamed lesser planets that distribute prana, maybe even etheric planets. It seems quite likely, in fact, that they would be planets that only exist in an etheric manner. So this problem in a systemic distribution also affects the quality of the prana received by each of the planets. Next, Problems with the solar systemic etheric web, defined by the solar logoic ring pasna, which, like its lesser counterparts, acts as a separator between the systemic, physical, etheric, and the systemic astral body. So evidently, problems of web integrity are also found at systemic levels. We can only guess at the ill effects that a weakened or breached etheric barrier between the cosmic physical and the cosmic astral planes might result in. Inappropriate or untimely stimulation of the kingdoms of nature on a planet? Who knows? It's difficult to say. He doesn't expand on the topic. This short paragraph reveals that all that has been written so far on the disorders of the etheric body has been introductory, and that we will now consider each level in more detail. So can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Catherine, you want to read?
Yes. A. Microcosmic functional disorders. These have to do with the reception by man via the necessary centers of the pranic fluids. We must always bear in mind and thus keep the distinction clear that these emanations of prana have to do with the heat latent in matter. When received and functioning through the etheric body correctly, they cooperate with the natural latent bodily warmth and, merging therewith, hold the body in a vitalized condition, imposing upon the matter of the body a certain rate of vibratory action that leads to the necessary activity of the physical vehicle and the right functioning of the organs. It will therefore be apparent that the ABC of bodily health is wrapped up in the right reception of prana, and that one of the basic changes that must be made in the life of the human animal, which is the aspect we are dealing with now, will be the ordinary conditions of living.
Thank you. So first, microscopic functional disorders. These have to do with the reception by man via the necessary centers of the pranic fluids. So again, we find the use of the word fluid to describe the pranic flow. An old commentary in esoteric healing states, "He who breathes forth the Om knows not himself alone. He knows the breath is prana, life, the fluid of connection. The ills of life are his because they are the lot of man, not generated in a shell, because the shell is not. He who is the sound and sounding forth knows not disease, knows not the hand of death." So in this we have a distinction between the effect of the ills of life, or ills of the pranic body, on those bound to form and those formless beings who are beyond this taint. Next, we must always bear in mind that, and thus keep the distinction clear, that these emanations of prana have to do with the heat latent in matter. Have to do with here means interacts with, for prana is radiatory, not latent. Latent fire, DK tells us, is the basis of life of the spheroidal cell or atom, and enables its rotary adjustment to all other cells. Can we get a reader here?
Yeah, and Veronica, are you there?
Yes. Latent or interior fire produces the internal heat, which makes the solar system productive of all forms of life. It is the inherent warmth that causes all fertilization, whether human, animal, or vegetable. Active or radiatory, fire retains in life and causes the evolution of all that has evolved into objectivity by means of latent fire.
Okay, thank you, Anne Veronica. Next, when received and functioning through the etheric body correctly, they cooperate with the natural latent bodily warmth, and merging therewith, hold the body in a vitalized condition. So prana is able to vitalize the body through its symbiotic, interactive relation with that body's latent heat. This passage from Esoteric Healing gives more insight. Could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Heike.
The love aspect shows itself through the heart, the circulatory system, and the nervous system. This is in many ways most important for you to understand, for it controls paramountly the etheric body and its assimilation of prana or vitality. This prana works through both the blood and the nerves. For the life force uses the bloodstream, and psychic force works through the nervous system.
Thank you, Heike. So the love aspect, as it demonstrates through the heart and thus the blood, is also a key aspect in the assimilation of prana. It's curious that DK makes no mention of the blood and prana's relationship to the second principle in this section in TCF on prana. We have to understand that the love aspect here described is itself a sub-aspect of the third or form principle. In other words, the blood carrying this quality of the second aspect is like a 3 sub 2, right? It's this second aspect of the third principle of form. Okay, next. These emanations of prana impose upon the matter of the body a certain rate of vibratory action that leads to the necessary activity of the physical vehicle and the right functioning of its organs. An important detail. This imposed vibratory action affects every atom of substance. It is a demonstration of fire by friction, and thus of the motion inherent in the one life. It's actually carrying this motion all the way down into physicality. Coarse matter moves at a slower rate, refined matter at a higher vibratory rate. It would seem that prana both stimulates and, importantly, regulates this vibratory action. Next, it will therefore be apparent that the ABC of bodily health is wrapped up in the right reception of prana, and that one of the basic changes that must be made in the life of the human animal, which is the aspect we are dealing with, will be in the ordinary conditions of living. So, right reception isn't based solely on exposure to the sun. In a treatise on white magic, DK tells us that physical injudiciousness may make the physical body non-receptive to prana. We might therefore conclude that any unhealthy physical activity, including poor diet, lack of sleep, destructive physical habits, etc., can stunt the pranic triangle and block the free flow of prana. Any thoughts about this? Questions?
And Veronica has a question about latent fires. When one dies, what happens to the latent fires when they leave the matter of the body? I think that's the question.
Well, they don't. What happens is the body breaks down into its smallest physical components, right? The atoms never die. They lose that which holds them as a unit, right? But they then become, food for other forms of life, and they continue their life in that way. So the latent fire is, you could say, transforms or transmutes into other forms. And it brings up the question, of course, what happens with the recommended method of, burning the body, that what happens then? And I think one of the reasons is that there's a magnetic hole between all these lesser lives and the life that inhabits the body, and freeing that hole liberates the inner life to move to its next level, which is eventually the soul, astral body, mental body, and then the soul. But the natural microscopic birth-death process is this transfer of latent heat. That's about all I can say about that, I guess.
Robert has a comment.
Yeah, Robert.
Question.
Just on this previous page, I sometimes get a little confused by cause and effect between the physical and the etheric. So that paragraph about, that led into the discussion of poor diet, et cetera,
Right.
When you eat a food, you're eating prana as well. So, you know what I'm saying in terms of what is the cause and what is the effect. Most of the time he's making the point that the physical body is an automaton that reacts automatically to the etheric energies. And other times he seems to imply that the physical body has an impact on etheric. And just like, for example, that last thing from esoteric healing you showed, where it talks about the heart and the circulatory system,
right,
affecting the etheric body. Is he talking about the etheric heart? The etheric circulatory? Anyway, I hope that's clear.
Yeah. Where's the cause and effect? Well, the general rule is, of course, that the etheric body is the source. Actually, it's receptive of the source, which then permeates the physical body with prana. Such things as assimilation of food and etc., I think, optimize the physical body for reception of prana from the etheric body. It's not in and of itself reception of prana. I think that prana is generally received through sunlight and through the breath. Those are its two prime functions. And then those two things affect the receptive ability of the physical body.
But you know what I mean in terms of, like, I eat a carrot, say, okay? That carrot has prana, is a container of prana as well, because it's received through its own process. Am I taking in the prana of the food that I eat? It seems as if there is some kind of etheric connection between, the eating, the digestion, et cetera.
Right. My understanding is that no, you don't. That what you're doing is that you're optimizing your physical body for the reception of prana from the spleen. I mean, he's very specific about where prana comes from, right? It's brought through the pranic triangle via the spleen, the etheric spleen into the physical spleen that then inundates the body, right? That I'm just looking at this to see. And then, once it comes into the body, for instance, this takes effect, where he's talking about how blood circulates, the circulatory system then circulates that prana, but its source, I don't think comes through digestion. At least I have never read that that's the case. You know.
Well, okay, the last thing I'll say, you know how in the Indian teachings, there's 5 forms that are related to prana. There's, I don't remember the names, but there's kind of the energy that goes up, the energy that goes down, out, etc. They're all kind of in the category of pranic like energies. It's more general than just prana. So I don't know, it's probably fairly complex process.
Yeah, I don't know how to plug that in for you, because it's there's also this pranic center in the head that's described by the Indians. Is it the what's the name of that prana? I can't remember. It's the highest form of prana, and that's not described in DK at all. It's, in other words, I think it's a similar energy that is given that name in Indian terminology, but DK chooses to use the term only in reference to the physical prana that is received through the 3 pranic centers of the triangle. And
I think it's mentioned in Light of the Soul. I'll go back and look it up. It's definitely in Light of the Soul.
Okay. Great. All right, let's get back to this.
Tia has a comment. I think, I don't know if you want to share your comment in the chat too.
Yes, Tia.
I was going to say, it's a whole system, right? It's so hard to extrapolate out one thing and say that's it, because we're talking about the septenary centers, and we're talking about how prana moves through the heart and the blood, and depending upon this, I know you know, Robert. I mean, the state of the chakras, right, and the development of them, that would also have I think, a profound effect upon the ability to assimilate, the prana that you're receiving, whether they're actually working correctly or not working correctly. Particularly in this case, it would be the heart chakra. And I would just think now, in the time period that we have, with all of that's going on astrally with humanity, and how people, the overstimulation of the heart chakra or the understimulation of the heart chakra, and that would be for people on the path or people approaching the path or not on the path, would really affect how much prana you would assimilate. And then my other comment has to do with violation of the law of conservation. In esoteric healing, Master DK talks about the law of conservation, and that you do bring in this karmic, this pranic energy, but through the injudicious use or activity, we can lose our own vitality. I mean, so we play a part consciously in our behavior as in this process as well.
Right. Yeah. It's, to keep clear cause and effect, that, source and reception, it helps to unmuddy these waters, that the prana comes through the pranic triangle, and then in other places he tells us that it also comes through the breath, which I think then plugs into this. In other words, that's another way of receiving and stimulating this pranic triangle. We haven't in this section gotten any information on the breath, but that then he literally tells us is received through the, quote, far side of the etheric spleen after 3 rotations of the prana, and then is taken into the physical body by the physical spleen, and there infuses the entire physical body with prana. That's the path of causality to, effect. Now, for instance, what you were saying about the blood and the heart and the all has to do with tuning the receptive aspect to make your body more attuned to this downflow or inflow of prana. Okay, could we get a reader for this paragraph, please?
Yeah. Just 2 comments on pramana: receiving prana through breath, hence various pranayama practices. And then Vivian says, and that was from Nisa, and then Vivian says there are known to have been saints who have lived purely through receiving the water of communion.
Yeah, it's true. I know in Autobiography of a Yoga, he talks about people who no longer eat because they're so optimized in their reception of prana that they no longer need food, that they can live purely on that pranic energy, those pranic currents. And I'm sure that's part of the yoga of pranayama. It's part of that breathing. It's interesting that he hasn't yet addressed, prana as it comes through the breath in this section. Anyone else before we get going?
No.
Okay, reader, please.
Joe.
Here, I'm here. The 3 fundamental centers whereby reception is brought about must be allowed to function with greater freedom and with less restriction. Now, owing to centuries of wrong living and to basic mistakes originating in Lemurian days, man's 3 pranic centers are not in good working order. The center between the shoulder blades is in the best receptive condition, though owing to the poor condition of the spinal column, which in so many is out of accurate alignment, its position in the back is apt to be misplaced. The splenic center near the diaphragm is subnormal in size, and its vibration is not correct. In the case of the Aboriginal dwellers in such localities as the South Seas, excuse me, better etheric conditions will be found. The life they lead is more normal from the animal standpoint than in any other portion of the world.
Thanks, Joe. I wonder how many, if we were to do a poll right now, how many of us sat up straight when you said the poor condition of the spinal column? I certainly did. Okay, first up, the 3 fundamental centers whereby reception is brought about must be allowed to function with greater freedom and with less restriction. These 3 centers are located in the shoulder blades, in the back, above the diaphragm, and the etheric spleen, which transfers prana to the physical spleen. We'll get some hint as to how these centers might function, quote, with greater freedom and less restriction as we continue reading. Next. Now, owing to centuries of wrong living and to basic mistakes originating in Lemurian days, man's 3 pranic centers are not in good working order. The here cited wrong living applies strictly to physical plane life and behaviors that impact physical plane living. MDR suggests that perhaps basic mistakes originating in Lemurian days had to do with clothing, carriage, or posture, and the food. And again, all of these would have to do with inhibiting reception. Next. The centers between the shoulder blades is in the best receptive condition, though owing to the poor condition of the spinal column, which in so many is out of accurate alignment, its position in the back is apt to be misplaced. So DK seems to here be suggesting that attending to the alignment of the spinal column can help free up the flow of prana. Modern chiropractics, osteopathy, and other alternative health practices specialized in spinal alignment and mobility. Note also that this highest pranic center is in the back of the body, not in front, but it's between the shoulder blades and in the back. Next, The splenic center near the diaphragm is subnormal in size, and its vibration is, quote unquote, not correct. This may be true at least in part because, except in Aboriginal societies, this center is blocked from exposure to the sun. Also, maybe the overactive solar plexus of so many people in modern society acts to inhibit this center, that solar plexus activity actually stymies the activity of this nearby pranic center. And finally, in the case of the Aboriginal dwellers in such localities as the South Seas, better etheric conditions will be found. The life they lead is more normal from the animal standpoint than any other portion of the world. Since DK's time, the true islander Aborigine has been fast disappearing. The most resistant to absorption by modern culture being Indigenous Australians. It's easy to see how living mostly outside in constant contact with the earth, the plant, the animal kingdoms, and being in constant contact with the sun, or I should say frequent contact with the sun, would increase the flow of prana. But I think it's deeper than just these physical aspects, that it has to do with the natural communion with nature that just in and of itself keeps those societal conditions from acting as blocks on the reception of prana. I saw Tia's hand go up. Yes.
I just think it's really interesting that when we talk about reception of prana, we're talking about the spleen itself, which is one of the centers that's definitely physical. But when we talk about the assimilation of prana, we talk about the heart. You can't do that without talking about the heart chakra, which is one of the higher centers, and it really goes to the point of how much you can actually make use of what you receive based upon the level of the spiritual vehicle.
Yeah, well, again, the heart itself is not itself a direct receiver of prana. It receives distribution from the double spleen, right? And
it assimilates. That was the word. Yeah. So you can receive it, but it does you no good if you can't assimilate it.
Yeah. It's important to keep these centers clear, that the etheric centers, as we normally think of them, aren't receptors of prana. They don't receive and distribute prana, but they use the prana received in order to function healthily in a healthy way, right? It's a double system, right?
Right, but I would think, it's the spiritual aspect, because so many of the health issues that we're going through, or that the challenges that we have, it's that, I guess, going back to Robert's original point about causality, it's that step from reception to assimilation that there may be a breakdown, right? Yeah, we're having a breakdown on reception, but also in the secondary function of assimilation.
Indeed. In fact, that's what he breaks these down into those separate areas very definitely. And that second is, he calls the organic, which has to do with the ability to distribute prana throughout the system. And he makes a strong distinction between that and the reception, which he calls functional, right? Yeah. But of course they work together. So you can imagine the pranic triangle sends, the energy passes around the pranic triangle 3 times, and then goes to the quote unquote far side of the etheric spleen, where the physical spleen receives it. and then it is distributed by means of the physical spleen through all parts of the body. But the ability of that body to assimilate that physically distributed, that splenic distribution, is going to be also based on the health of the body, corporate, of the body as a whole. He says earlier that if you're in poor health, the spleen lessens the amount of prana that is distributed. He says that in a previous section. And we took a look at that, the idea being that, perhaps that the regulation of the prana and of the vibratory rate of the prana has to be in accord with your health aura, with how you're able to receive, because after all, it is a fiery source, right? And if you're not, it could be that if you're not healthy, that too much prana will literally be counterproductive, that it won't bring you out of it. The way back to health is to bring your physical body to a point to where it can be once again receptive of a higher dose of prana, which I think is what, most convalescence is probably, it's one of the invisible parts of that.
Robert has something.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I found that place in Light of the Soul that represents what I was talking about. And it says that prana in the body is fivefold. And then it gives the 5 definitions, and it depends on which area in the body it's moving through. And it uses the Indian names. It's page 328 to 330. So it's very interesting. I think that what I was talking about is, and I think somebody just mentioned, it's the difference between reception and then the distribution. You receive prana, and then prana is distributed around the body in different areas, and each of those has a different name because it's a division of prana. It's one of them's got to do with digestion, one of them has to do with the breath, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's more to be plumbed there. I'm going to definitely read this again.
Remember when we were looking at A.E. Powell's book, Etheric Body, that he also describes these, how once it moves through that center of that circle, that is the far side of the spleen, then he goes into great detail as to literally breaking it down into 7 different colors of prana that then move to different areas of the body. And so, yes, there is more to this science than DK is giving us in this introductory section.
It's kind of fascinating because these Indian words, this is a science from India, thousands and thousands of years old. And it's just incredible how far advanced they were in so many ways over where we are today.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things about especially HPB is that you realize that the ancient wisdom wasn't born in 1888 when HPB wrote The Secret Doctrine. It's always been with us. She collected it and brought it to the West and created a unified doctrine of it. But you can follow any of these threads back into Greek times, into Egyptian times, into especially HPB talks a lot about the Vedantan school and the esoteric Buddhist school, and the origins being thousands of years, where these disciplines, many of them still extant. We still can read these words in the Upanishads and other sources, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting in terms, sometimes I think about, okay, here's Cosmic Fire, incredibly dense. Who was this written for? And in 1925, who was supposed to read this? And you had the Theosophists of the time who had read a lot of the Annie Besant books. Ledbetter's a kind of mixed bag, but a lot of the Annie Besant books dealt with these kinds of things. They're almost like preliminary texts that it would be great if we all knew prior to reading this. I think would probably answer a lot of questions for us.
Yeah, that's right. Besant is a fantastic source for many of the subjects that that DK deals with. Um, and some of these writers do deal in more detail. But, you know, myself, I always find that the central truth is can be found in the DK writings, and that then if you want to explore that, you can, you know, like you say, go abroad with Besant and other sources. Yeah, I see hands. Mikhail, are you there?
Yeah, Tia.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Robert, if you could just put in the chat your citation, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
And I also I think this is I guess it's as you said, Francis, just you skim the surface. Even this is just skimming the surface. It goes so much deeper than this. Because I always question, you know, if we're thinking about the physical etheric body that each one of us chooses to incarnate in. So array 3 or array 7, right?
Right.
How that impacts this whole pranic system and our ability to receive, and how we, you know, we process the pranic energy as it moves through that physical etheric vehicle.
Yes, indeed. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe a paper on in the future, but that's just
Yeah.
I mean, I find that so intriguing to me.
You write that paper, Tia, make sure send me a copy. How does the ray energy of the physical sheath, usually 3rd and 7th, but not always, affect the etheric vehicle and the distribution of prana? That's your title. Okay, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, the Joe mentions the metaphor I'm forming is a huge spider web with a spider in the center. Spider is form, the body, receiver of prana, and radiator. The web is consciousness itself as it expands out to cosmic levels.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, he describes it as a system, a web-like system of tubes that allow this pranic fluid, which is electrical fluid, to circulate, right? And that there's no part of that. He ultimately describes it as a cord that then articulates as this web. And there's no part of this cord or web that is not connected to all other parts of it. So, yeah. Anyone else?
That's it.
Good stuff. Okay, reader, please.
Kira.
The race suffers from certain incapacities, which may be described as follows. First, inability to tap pranic currents, owing to the unhealthy lives passed by so many. This involves the cutting off of the source of supply and the consequent atrophying and shrinkage of the receptive centers. This is seen in an exaggerated form in the children of the congested quarters of any great city and in the vitiated, anemic dwellers of the slums. The cure is apparent: the bringing about of better living conditions, the employment of more appropriate clothing, and the adoption of a freer and more salubrious mode of living. When the pranic rays can find free access to the shoulders and to the diaphragm, the subnormal state of the average spleen will adjust itself automatically.
Thank you. So we've covered many of these points, but DK's last statement is the clearest yet about the need to adjust our clothing so that sunshine has unimpeded access to the shoulders and the diaphragm. Such a simple solution, but due to cultural norms and climate, so difficult to consistently implement. DK also points out the subnormal state of the average spleen, not the subnormal size necessarily, but something affecting its functionality. Of course, the good news is that it will adjust itself automatically once we address some of these issues. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, before that, Nisa or something.
I just wanted to say that when this was written, I'm not sure when it was written, but certainly clothing is a lot less substantial these days than when it was written.
Yeah, the Victorian is over pretty much.
Yeah, and fabrics are thinner. I've even gotten a suntan through a blouse, you know, wasn't that revealing, but it looked opaque. But I think modern living is for those of us who are living in, a rich country like the United States, or,
Right. Yeah, that you can take measures, take steps to adjust, to this. I can imagine, a Vogue magazine article for in the 22nd century, new wardrobes oriented towards pranic reception,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what you say is totally true. I think that, conditions in 1925, which was still being affected by, Victorian thinking, with these all the way around up to the top of the neck, kind of styles in some parts of the world, even though, the flappers had come to the US and it was right in the middle of that period. And they were definitely introduced this idea of a whole new way of looking at clothing. But since that, from our point of view, that's all ancient history, that we have way less restrictive clothing that allows more exposure to the sun. But at the same time, you still have winter to deal with, right? You can't be going out with a bare midriff and off the shoulder top in winter. So it's still a problem for just because of climate, And then we have this other thing, which is the idea that exposure to the sun is cancer producing and that you should always cover up. So, these are at odds with this teaching. So you just have to work it out best you can in your own life. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Tia has something else to say.
Yeah, Tia.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, because when we think about the triangle, that's with respect to the reception of solar prana, correct? And so for the planetary prana, is that coming to us through, I guess, water, or it would be air, something from the planet itself? And that's how we would receive it through other centers?
Yeah, well, first of all, solar prana is conditioned somewhat by planetary prana. But he makes a comment back in page 50 something in TCF that planetary prana is largely received through the pores of the skin. Now, he doesn't elaborate, he doesn't say, through water or through air, my guess is both the above, so yeah. Anyone else? Okay, can we get a reader?
Yeah, Kirsten.
Second, over ability to tap pranic currents. The first type of functional disorder is common and widespread. Its reverse can be found where conditions of life are such that the centers, though too direct and prolonged submittal to soul emanation, become overdeveloped, vibrate too rapidly, and receive prana in too great an amount. This is rarer, but is found in some tropical countries and is responsible for much of the troublesome debility that attacks dwellers in these lands. The etheric body receives prana or solar rays too rapidly, passes it through and out of the system with too much force, and this leaves the victim a prey to inertia and devitalization.
Thank you. This is DK's second point, citing, quote, certain incapacities, which is in this case an overability to tap pranic currents, a condition less widespread than the lack of exposure to prana. The end of this passage tells us that the etheric body receives prana too rapidly, passes it through and out of the system with too much force, which leaves the victim a prey to inertia and devitalization. We discover why too much prana leads to devitalization, a condition which occurs in some tropical countries, in this next passage. Could we get a reader, please?
Maria.
Yes. Putting it otherwise, the etheric body becomes lazy. It's like an unstrung web, or to use a very homely illustration, it resembles a tennis racket, which has become too soft and has lost its resilience. The inner triangle transmits the pranic emanations with too great rapidity, giving no time for the subsidiary absorption, and the whole system is thereby the loser. Later, it will be found that many of the ills that Europeans living in India fall heir to originate in this way. And by attention, therefore, to the spleen, and by wise control of living conditions, some of the trouble may be obviated.
Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
So after the tennis racket analogy, we learned that, quote, the inner triangle transmits the pranic emanations with too great rapidity, giving no time for the subsidiary absorption, and the whole system is thereby the loser. So overexposure leads to too rapid a transmission, which possibly because it exceeds what DK earlier calls the rate of vibratory action, which prana regulates, defeats the spleen's ability to absorb prana. It's likely that the wise control of living conditions, especially for those who weren't born into these conditions, i.e. British colonials, includes simply staying out of the sun, right? Next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yeah, Mary.
In touching upon similar conditions in the planet, both these types of trouble will be found. More cannot be said, but in the wise study of solar radiation upon the surface of the planet in connection with its rotary action, some of the group rules of health may be comprehended and followed. The spirit of the planet, or the planetary entity, likewise, has his cycles, and in an absorption of planetary prana, and in its correct distribution lies the secret of fertility and equable vegetation. Much of this is hidden in the fabled story of the war between fire and water, which has its basis in the reaction of the fire latent in matter to the fire emanating outside of matter and playing upon it.
Thank you. So first, in touching upon similar conditions in the planet, both these types of trouble will be found. So that is both an under and overstimulation by prana, which extraordinarily can affect a planet. DK's next statement gives a hint as to how this might manifest. In the wise study of solar radiation upon the surface of the planet, in connection with its rotary action, some of the group rules of health may be comprehended and followed. First, there is no mention of group rules of health in any other of DK's writings. This is the sole appearance of this phrase. There are group rules, but they mostly have to do with discipleship. That aside, the obvious reading of this sentence is something like, solar radiation, the source of prana, reaches different parts of the earth in different amounts based on the seasons, which are determined by Earth's journey around the sun, its cyclic activity. So, for example, being on the 78th parallel, the 78th northern parallel, the town of Longyearbyen, Finland, is in continuous near darkness from November 11th to January 30th, thus, like right now, thus greatly reducing the amount of prana available to its residents. For this reason, the, quote, group health of this town is literally determined by the planet's, quote unquote, rotary action. But this doesn't really address DK's point, which is that the health of the Earth itself is subject to and determined by its exposure to prana. Since it undergoes increasingly wider yearly variations of pranic exposure in its extreme northern and southern latitudes, we might hypothesize that the health aura of the planet itself, not just the population in these extreme climes, is affected. If this is the case, the planetary health might also be impacted by the opposite condition, too much prana, which affects the equatorial regions of the Earth. It's just speculation, but it's one possibility. Next, the spirit of the planet, or the planetary entity, likewise has his cycles, and in the absorption of planetary prana and in its correct distribution lies the secret of fertility and equable vegetation. So you remember, we just read about spirit of the planet, usually called the planetary entity, is the unified life that demonstrates through all the elemental lives that form the planet sheath. It's easy to see how correct distribution of prana would impact the fertility of all the lower kingdoms in nature. But DK is saying more than this, suggesting that the miracle of fertility itself, the secret over which biologists are still puzzling, has its source in the existence of planetary prana and its correct distribution. To me, this suggests that the animating life aspect that originates in the sun and is colored by planetary prana is the source of all fertility and fecundity all throughout the system, which varies in its potency based on how correctly this planetary prana is assimilated and distributed. Equable vegetation suggests an equally distributed vegetable kingdom. The lack of this equable distribution, more than any other factor, indicates the lack of correct pranic distribution on our planet. Next, much of this is hidden in the fabled story of the war between fire and water, which has its basis in the reaction of the fire latent in matter to the fire emanating outside of matter and playing upon it. So when all is reduced to the fundamental duality of fire and water, these two become metaphors for spirit and matter, brought into union by Fohat, which together make up the universe. Their combination produces consciousness, which as it evolves, moves ever more towards the inner fiery nature, which is why DK says fire always carries forward esoterically that which water has begun. So that's where we're going to have to stop. We'll pick up with this slide next time, and then we'll look at what Michael has to say about this this idea of the meaning of fire and water. So we're going to have our next TCF, I believe, is on the 9th of December, and then we're going to have 2 in a row. So it's going to be a kind of intensive year on the 9th and the 16th, Fridays on those 2 days. And between that, we have the first Sunday of December, we also have a Secret Teaching of All Ages webinar. So hope to see you all at all of those webinars. Any final comments before we pull the plug? Thank you all for coming. I enjoyed this session.
Catherine says, I wonder if changes in climates in various locations will therefore affect health conditions from changes in exposure to prana.
Oh, absolutely. I think the two are inextricably linked. You know, destruction of the biosphere is going to radically change the distribution of prana, you know. Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely true. Anyone else?
Tia has her hand up. Tia.
I just wanted to say thank you because this teaching has so much usefulness as far as application is concerned. And it also opens up some bigger, I mean, it actually gives me some, I guess, thought about health overall and disease, you know, and the fact that I've been pondering this question about the third initiation. And, you know, you're not supposed to be subject to so many diseases after the third initiation. Right. But we do see people who have taken the third initiation who succumb to disease. So it's this has helped me in moving that understanding a little bit forward. So thank you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, great. Yeah, it's very practical stuff, you know, having to do with physical plane. Anyone else? Saw Robert Tam flash up there.
Yeah, Robert
Yeah,
too.
I just wanted to say that those pages on Light of the Soul that are stuck in the chat, they're really fascinating. I hadn't read them for a long time, but it talks about these 5 subdivisions of prana, and it answers some of the questions we were talking about earlier, which is, how can you live without food? Well, if you're a master of the prana that has to do with digestion, you can control those things. It's also related to the cities, levitation. Anyway, those are really fascinating pages that if somebody's interested, they should check it out.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, we'll see you all next time.